After nearly 10 years of separation, a bobcat named Jasper was on the verge of seeing the caretaker who had looked after him as a cub, a reunion that seemed beyond anyone's wildest dreams. What followed would touch even the hardest of hearts. "Can you really confirm it's him?" Marcus Tanner questioned, his tone filled with both doubt and longing as he held an aged photograph of a young bobcat. The feline in the image had sharp, curious eyes, and the memories seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. At 35, Marcus was returning to Montana, a place he hadn't set foot in for nearly a decade. Life had taken him far from his youth in the wilderness, but he had never forgotten Jasper, the orphaned bobcat he'd helped raise. In his early 20s, Marcus had been a wildlife rehabilitation intern at Clearwater Sanctuary, a modest haven nestled in the rugged terrain of the Rocky Mountains. He worked tirelessly with young animals, especially Jasper, who had been brought to the sanctuary as a tiny cub after his mother was killed by a poacher. Jasper had been malnourished and timid, but he thrived under Marcus's care. They formed a bond that felt unshakable. But the sanctuary's limited resources eventually forced them to transfer Jasper to a larger reserve. News had recently reached Marcus that a bobcat matching Jasper's description had been sighted near the sanctuary. The idea stirred a flood of emotions. Marcus had neither seen nor heard about Jasper since the transfer, but he often wondered what had become of the cub who had once been his shadow. Now he couldn't resist the call to see if it was truly Jasper. Though the odds weren't in his favor, Marcus clung to hope. When he arrived at the sanctuary, Marcus was greeted by Ben, a young ranger in his early 30s. "You must be Marcus," Ben said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've heard stories about you and Jasper. My older brother Jack worked with you back then. He said you were inseparable." As they strolled through the sanctuary grounds, Marcus shared the old photograph of Jasper and recounted cherished memories of their time together. "He used to follow me everywhere," Marcus said, his voice thick with nostalgia. "We'd play hide and seek in the woods. He always found me, no matter how well I hid." Ben listened intently but tempered Marcus's enthusiasm with a gentle warning. "Marcus, you should prepare yourself. It's been a long time. Bobcats are solitary by nature, and 10 years is a long period for an animal to remember specific humans." Despite the caution, Marcus couldn't shake the hope that clung to him. He remembered the unique bond he shared with Jasper, the playful flick of the cub's tail, the way he would chirp softly when Marcus called his name. It was a connection too deep to simply fade away, wasn't it? As they approached the observation area, Ben explained that Jasper had been spotted near the sanctuary's outskirts about 6 months ago. "He's older now, obviously. He roams the woods mostly but comes close to the sanctuary's feeding stations from time to time," Ben said. "We haven't seen him react to anyone in a particularly unique way, but who knows? Maybe you'll be the exception." The following day, Marcus joined a group observing the sanctuary's wildlife. The area had changed over the years, becoming a bustling reserve with tourists, photographers, and researchers. As the hours passed, Marcus's anticipation grew. Then he saw him, a sleek, muscular bobcat emerging cautiously from the tree line. His coat was thicker and more weathered, his eyes sharper but still carrying an undeniable intelligence. Marcus's heart raced. "That's him," Marcus whispered, gripping Ben's arm. "That has to be Jasper." Ben studied the animal for a moment and nodded. "It's possible. He's the only one of his kind we've seen in this area with that distinct scar over his right eye. But it's hard to say if he'll recognize you." The bobcat's ears flicked toward the sound of Marcus's voice, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. It was fleeting but enough to ignite a spark of hope in Marcus. "I need to get closer," he said. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus approached the feeding station where Jasper lingered. He crouched down, holding out the photograph as if it were a talisman. "Jasper," he called softly. "It's me. Do you remember?" The bobcat's tail twitched, and his body stiffened slightly, but he didn't run. Instead, he took a cautious step closer, his sharp eyes locked on Marcus. Ben watched from a distance, his expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "Give him time," he said. Advised, Marcus stayed still, his heart pounding. Slowly, Jasper moved closer, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Marcus's mind raced with memories of their shared past. He remembered the night spent in the sanctuary's enclosure, Jasper curled up beside him, purring softly. He remembered the first time Jasper caught a mouse, proudly presenting it to Marcus as if seeking approval. Jasper stopped a few feet away, his head tilted slightly as though trying to piece together a puzzle. Then, in a gesture that took Marcus's breath away, Jasper let out a soft chirp, the same sound he used to make as a cub. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "He remembers," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. Slowly, he extended his hand, palm up in a non-threatening gesture. Jasper hesitated but then took another step forward, his nose brushing Marcus's fingers briefly before retreating. It was a moment of tentative recognition, fragile but real. "That was incredible," Ben said, approaching cautiously. "I've never seen him do that with anyone before." The bond between Marcus and Jasper began to rekindle over the next few days. Marcus spent hours near the feeding stations, speaking softly to the bobcat and recreating familiar routines from their past. One afternoon, he brought out an old leather glove Jasper had loved to play with. The sight of it seemed to stir something in the bobcat. Jasper batted at it with a paw, his movements cautious but playful. But the reunion wasn't without challenges. Jasper's years in the wild had made him more wary and independent. There were moments when he would disappear into the woods for hours, leaving Marcus to wonder if he'd come back. Ben urged patience. "He's lived a different life since you last saw him. You've got to let him come to you on his own terms." Marcus understood but found it hard to accept. He wanted so badly to reclaim the bond they once shared. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus tried something he hadn't done in years. He crouched behind a large boulder and called out, "Jasper, come find me." For a moment, there was silence. Then Marcus heard the soft rustle of leaves. He peeked out from his hiding spot to see Jasper stalking toward him, his movements fluid and deliberate. When Jasper found him, he stopped and chirped softly, as if to say, "I've got you." Marcus laughed, the sound filled with relief and joy. The game became a daily ritual, a way to rebuild their connection. Each time, Jasper seemed to relax a little more, his trust in Marcus slowly returning. But there were also reminders of how much had changed. Jasper's instincts, honed by years in the wild, often pulled him away. He'd freeze at the slightest sound, his ears swiveling toward potential threats. One afternoon, as Marcus sat near the edge of the sanctuary's boundary, Jasper approached him and lay down a few feet away, his body relaxed but alert. Marcus took the opportunity to speak softly, recounting stories from their past. "You were such a troublemaker," he said, smiling. "Do you remember sneaking into the kitchen and stealing the chicken off the counter? You scared the cook half to death." Jasper blinked slowly, a gesture Marcus chose to interpret as understanding. It was a small but significant moment, a sign that their bond was still there, buried beneath the years of separation. Their reunion reached a turning point one evening when a pack of coyotes ventured too close to the sanctuary's perimeter. Jasper, sensing the threat, positioned himself between Marcus and the approaching predators, his body tense and ready. He let out a low, guttural growl, a sound Marcus had never heard from him before. The coyotes backed off, their challenge unanswered. Jasper turned to Marcus, his expression unreadable, but his actions spoke volumes. "You're protecting me now," Marcus said softly, his voice filled with awe, "just like I used to protect you." As the days turned into weeks, Marcus realized that while their bond had changed, it hadn't disappeared. Jasper was no longer the playful cub he had once known, but he was still Jasper, independent, intelligent, and deeply connected to Marcus in ways that transcended time. When the time came for Marcus to leave, He felt a pang of sadness, but also a profound sense of gratitude. On his last day at the sanctuary, Jasper approached him one final time. He let out a soft chirp and nudged Marcus's hand with his nose, a gesture that felt like a farewell. "I'll never forget you, Jasper," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for remembering me." As Marcus walked away, he turned back one last time to see Jasper watching him from the edge of the woods. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Marcus knew that the bond they shared would remain, no matter how much time passed.